Continue then to unpack what are causing the delays, not just from a criminal justice system perspective, but as we drill down, we were just talking to Monique Mortlock, and she had spoken to someone from Cape Town who was part of the SAPS Community Policing Forum about the DNA testing backlog and what an issue that actually is. Well, let's continue that conversation. DNA for Africa Regional Director Vanessa Lynch joining us this morning. Vanessa, hello to you. It's always such a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm not sure if you heard when I was speaking to Monique, I had the police minister on the show yesterday briefly, and I asked him about the DNA backlog, and he says they're making progress. September, if I recall correctly, he said we should be just about on top of that. Do you agree with the police minister?
Morning, Gareth. There certainly is an enormous amount of progress that has been made since last year. One thing we have to understand is that they've ring-fenced the backlog, the number that was given in 2021, and they're reducing that backlog absolutely. But we mustn't forget that at the same time, there's a continuation of cases being received, and that's never really added to that figure. So there will always theoretically be a backlog of cases, but it's very encouraging to see that they have allocated a further 50 million rand in the police budget yesterday, and that's for reference sampling, so that now we can sample arrestees and convicted offenders. There is more money coming in to facilitate that process. So I don't know if we're going to get to a zero backlog by September. I think that's not really very realistic, but we are encouraged by the steps that have been taken since last year to address the backlog, and that hadn't been done prior to November 2021.
And I think this is why it's so important, Vanessa, that you and I speak every now and then, because it's this kind of public pressure, hearing from experts like you about this, which is why we're at least making some headway. What seems to be the holdup? Yes, you can throw money at the problem. It seems that obviously is one way of doing this, and I think you call it ring fencing. That's another way of doing it. But what seems to be the holdup? Is it an issue at the police station level? Is it the collection of kits? Is it not enough experts? Can you narrow it down to one issue if possible?
Well, there wasn't a backlog until such time as the police actually withdrew baseline funding to the forensic science laboratories. And what happened, this was an accumulation of events. Because you're not funding consumables, because you're not maintaining the instrumentation, which has to be maintained in order to ensure that the validation is correct for the processes, you get to a situation where you're receiving cases which are being collected, but you're not processing them. And that really is what caused the backlog, is that for 18 months there was literally a stop at all forensic science laboratories. To address that, they had to reinstate contracts, they had to issue tenders, provide funding, but in the meantime, this continuation of cases, as I mentioned, continues. So it really was the cause of the backlog, because prior to that, when the forensic science laboratories were being funded, the equipment was being maintained, there really wasn't a backlog to speak of, and they were getting 1 hit per hour on the DNA database. Now, probably up to 1 a month, although that is changing. Yeah. So it really does come down to funding. It is critical that that the forensic science laboratories are supported in this way.
And Vanessa, that's where I was going to go to next, just as a last question to you. We're going to hand you, as DNA for Africa, the control of this. The police are going to look to you, and I'm giving you a scenario here. Government's going to look to you and go, all right, Vanessa, I saw you talking to Gareth. You're in control. What's the one thing you would do? What's the one thing that can make the biggest difference here before I say goodbye?
Increased capacity. We need public-private partnerships. We need more forensic science laboratories to assist the state laboratories, certainly for the time being, in order to ensure that more samples are processed. And that would probably require even more funding. But I do think that once you have the criminal population on the database, it's an intense few years of support, and thereafter these serial offenders will be identified, and we will start to really have an impact on gender-based violence, which is perpetuated 90% of the time by serial offenders. That's what I would look at.
And this is why I always appreciate speaking to you and you taking time for us, Vanessa Lynch, DNA for Africa. But it's one thing to always ask the question, what is the problem? You've also got to ask, how do we fix it, and when can we get it done by? That's why it's great to have DNA for Africa's Regional Director, Vanessa Lynch, joining us here on eNCA.